Now, apparently, there's a massive black hole in public spending. Experts warn it could see you paying more tax. Chancellor Rachel Reeves is set to reveal the government are hoping to fill an around £19 billion gap in public finances. This is planned for a speech on Monday, where the Chancellor will say things were oh so much worse than she was expecting to find. But what's the truth? Well, joining us now is the co-founder of Regionally, Justin Urquhart-Stewart. Because, Justin, I was given to understand that we had something called the Office for Budget Responsibility that made all of these numbers public.
Apparently so. But all you have to do is actually have a little bit of inflation, and suddenly these numbers can vary really quite considerably. And not just in terms of actually what the budget is, but how the amount of money that's been put aside for it. Now, to have a couple of years of higher inflation and all the old budget controls that you had in place suddenly look very stupid. So what we're going to be seeing now is a row of rotten dentures being put in front of us, which would be all the different budgets for all the different areas of assets and investment you're going to see from the last government. And it's going to look awful. How do you do that? Well, you add a few noughts to it. It's the same old trick, because then what you're going to be doing, we're going to have to pay for it somehow. Good heavens, we didn't want to put up taxes, but we're going to have to because it was their fault. So I'm afraid it's an old trick. And so be prepared and be wary, be very suitably cynical. That's what politicians do.
Justin, cynical may be, but is this a bit more than cynical? After all, the Labour Party spent a 6-week election campaign saying they would not raise any taxes other than those that they laid out in their manifesto. And now we hear they're preparing this big speech on Monday where they say, everything was far worse than we ever expected, and we're going to have to raise more taxes than we thought we would. I mean, it seems deeply dishonest to me.
Because what you can now do is to say, as far as I'm concerned, we weren't going to raise taxes, but those wretched people there, we actually looked inside and they weren't telling the truth, so therefore we're going to change our tune. So I'm afraid you're going to see more of this coming through. Now, also, watch out for another thing. You'll actually be able to see some adjustment in the growth figures as well. So next month, what you'll start seeing is actually some slightly better growth figures, which, lo and behold, the new government will say, because of what we've done here, we've improved a certain amount of confidence, a bit more money coming in, and suddenly things will look a bit better. So bad news to start with, and then give you some good news a little bit later. So I'm afraid at the moment, be prepared. You're going to have more VAT going up on things like, well, there's private schools, so there'll be other areas as well. I'm afraid that's going to be almost inevitable. They're quite right. Of course, they've got to grow the economy. That's every single person running a business knows full well that's what you've got to try and do. What you've got to do, though, is get confidence back into the economy, and that's the problem. Where does that come from? That comes actually from investors, both domestic and overseas investors. So really what they've got to be doing is not so much talking to us domestically, but internationally to say, invest in Britain now, because actually we're going to be actually good people to handle the economy. Well, I'm afraid Labour does not always have a very good track record on that. So we'll have to wait and see how good they are with their wise words and whether we believe them or not.
Well, it seems that we're back to the bad old days of spin, 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 more than grow, grow, grow. Keir Starmer's been saying all this week that the inheritance he has been given is the worst since 1945. Presumably, that means he thinks it's worse than 1974, 2 years after which we had to seek a bailout from the International Monetary Fund. Or worse than 2010, when we had a deficit that touched 10% of GDP and unemployment about 3 times higher than it is today. I mean, where do they get off on this stuff?
I'm afraid people have very short memories indeed when it comes to this, because you've quite rightly gone back to some elements there where, quite rightly, we were being told really some really large porkies indeed. Now, what we've got to do now is you go through these very clearly indeed and say, right, how do these figures compare with what we knew they were a few months back, and how have they been adjusted? Is there actually a shortfall here, or have you adjusted some of the expectations of growth, and therefore you think you're going to have less money coming in, therefore you're going to find a gap, therefore I've got to put up taxes. And so what they need to try and do, and this is, I suspect, what they do, give you bad news, then feed you some better news. That'll get a bit more investment coming into the country because they'll look as though they're running the place a bit better. And so they'll find themselves in a position where the cost of funding may start going down a bit. If they can do that, it's a good trick to try and play. But
a
really,
smart
you
trick.
have to look at these figures. Very, very clever indeed.
Yeah, make things seem worse than they are initially, so that then the improvement that you're seeking looks oh so much bigger if and when it happens. Justin Urquhart-Stewart, thank you so much for joining us and talking through this magic trick that the Chancellor is attempting to play. Let's see if it works.